Okay, guys, I would like to begin just by giving a little bit of clarification for Chapter 3. We will only have two lessons from Chapter 3. The first part deals with cell anatomy, a little bit of physiology, and also some review of mitosis. I do encourage you to read over that in your notes, but the primary objective that I want to focus on for this chapter is going to be tissues. So make sure you're following along in your book as well. There's a lot of information there, some good diagrams and pictures that you can use to have a better understanding of the deeper knowledge for this lesson. So let's start with connective tissue. Now, connective tissue is found everywhere in the body, and it quite literally holds the body together. Okay, so it binds different body tissues together, supports, even provides protection across the entire body. So its characteristics, there are different variations in blood supply that are present throughout the different types that we'll go through. Some have a very poor blood supply or even avascular, but many of them do produce what's called the extracellular matrix. Now, this is the non-living part, the material it produces sends outside of its cells and then surrounds them. Now, within the extracellular matrix, we have two components, two main elements. We have the ground substance, it's mainly water, some adhesion proteins, some polysaccharide molecules, and then the fibers that are produced. These are produced by the cells themselves. We have three types: collagen, elastic, and reticular. We'll talk about those in detail in just a second. Okay, we also have bone or osseous tissue. This is composed of bone cells and lacunae. These are the cavities where they're found. And then they produce that hard extracellular matrix of calcium salts. It has a lot of collagen fibers. And I'm sure we all know that the skeletal system, as we call it, is used to protect and support the body. We will get into more detail in actual physiology of the skeletal system in Chapter 5 in a couple of weeks. Okay, so figure 3.19a outlines this. We have a basic sketch that we see right here. We have these lacunae right here, and then our central canals being surrounded right here. This is an actual micrograph increased 250 times. We can see these structures here. All right, so hyaline cartilage. Now, it's the most common type of cartilage. It's abundant collagen fibers. It's a rubbery matrix. It's found in the larynx, that's in your throat, your voice box, so to say. And it's actually the entire fetal skeleton prior to birth. So before birth, your skeleton actually begins as hyaline cartilage, and then it begins to be implanted, so to say, by our osteocytes. Those are the cells that are going to make bone, and excuse me, they will eventually completely convert it to bone by age 2. Now, this explains why at birth the newborn skull has these soft spots, so to say. That's actually hyaline cartilage. It's left over, and it allows for rapid growth of the skull to accommodate rapidly increasing brain volume. Okay, so when we look at this, the example we have right here, the costal cartilages. These are the cartilages that connect the ribs to the sternum that we see right here. Okay, so this photomicrograph we have right here, the cells themselves, the chondrocytes, these are actually pretty small, are lacunae as well. And then it's this matrix they produce outside of them that is the bulk of the volume, so to say. Now, again, it's flexible. In this instance, we need it to be flexible so that our rib cage can expand and contract with respiration. So elastic cartilage, hence its name, provides elasticity, supports the external ear that is outside. We'll talk in detail in Chapter 5 about why it's important that that's elastic cartilage and not hard bone. We have fiber cartilage. It's very highly compressible. It's found between discs in the vertebrae. Okay, so we can see our fiber cartilage right here, hence its name. We can see these collagen fibers that are being produced. Okay, so this striated or kind of banded appearance that we see right here, Okay, so the lacunae right here, the chondrocytes, are actually pretty small in comparison to all of the fibers that they produce. Okay, now because of this, it gives it pretty high tensile strength so that it doesn't tear apart. All right, so let's talk about our dense connective tissue types. Okay, so our main matrix element is collagen fiber, and they make fibers as well. We find them in tendons, ligaments, and in the dermis, the lower layer of the skin. We need these to be relatively tough so that they don't separate easily. Okay, so easy way to remember this: tendon attaches bone to muscle, ligaments attach bone to bone at the joints. Okay, so when you hear things like your ACL, that's the anterior collateral ligament, okay, that's found in your knee. Anterior meaning the front. Okay, your LCL, lateral collateral, PCL, MCL, all have those same directional terms that we talked about back in chapter 1. Okay, so we see this wavy appearance, so to say. Okay, we can see the nuclei of our fibroblast here, these dark staining parts, and then the lighter regions being the collagen fibers that are produced. Now, we also have loose connective tissue types. Now, areolar, this is a most widely distributed connective tissue. It's a packing tissue, so to say. It can soak up excess body fluid, causing edema. Okay, it's very pliable and is going to be used to connect different tissue types. So we see this web-like structure right here. Okay, we find it deep to the dermis. Okay, often in the lamina propria layer. Excuse me. We'll talk in more detail about the importance of this in our next chapter, chapter 4, dealing with the integumentary system. Okay, we also have adipose tissue. Now, this is commonly called our body fat. Many cells that contain large lipid deposits. Now, this is going to help insulate the body to help regulate body temperature. It also surrounds our body organs and serves as a site of fuel storage. So for this long-term energy storage, we store this as lipids. So you'll see here that the cells, the nucleus is actually very, very small, and then the vast majority of it is going to contain a fat droplet. The proper term is a micelle, M-I-S-C-L-E, and you can see that it's going to be the super majority of the volume within there. Okay, and that's its only purpose is just to store that. Okay, we also have reticular connective tissue. Again, we have some interwoven fibers. It forms the stroma, or the internal supporting network of our lymphoid organs. It's also found in our bone marrow. Okay, and we need, in this case, we need this storage area, so to say, for a lot of our immune cells, and helping to remove a lot of the toxic substances that we find within our body. Okay, now blood is actually a tissue. Okay, we talked about that back in chapter 1, and our blood cells are surrounded by this fluid matrix called blood plasma. Okay, we have fibers that are in there that are present during clotting, which is very important, and it functions as a transport vesicle materials throughout the body, whether that be our respiratory gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide in the form of carbonic acid, or different nutrients that we need to circulate throughout the body as well. So we can see right here are these normal red blood cells. I say normal, this nice donut shape. We also have different types of cells, white blood cells. In this case, we have a monocyte here. We have neutrophils. There are others as well, eosinophils, basophils. We'll talk about those in chapter 10, dealing just with blood. Okay, now finally, muscle tissue. Again, its function is to produce movement at the expense of energy. We have 3 types. We have skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Now, skeletal, it's voluntary, meaning we can control it most of the time. Okay, so it contracts to pull on bones or skin. Okay, now that's very important right there. Skeletal muscle only pulls, it does not push. Okay, so most of our muscles that we have, our skeletal muscles in the body, they are paired, meaning that one will do one action and then another will do the opposite of that action. Okay, so they are striated, multinucleate, and they are long and cylindrical. They do not branch. Okay, so we see this long banding pattern here, these dark staining regions right here. These are going to be our nuclei. And then each fiber will actually be bound in what's called a fascicle. We'll talk in more detail about the muscular system in chapter 6. Okay, now cardiac muscle. So cardiac muscle is involuntary. This is pretty important. We don't want to have to sit there and consciously think about making our heart beat. We want it to be done on its own. It's found only in the heart, and it's striated as well. However, it is branched, okay, and it's uninucleate. And our cells are joined together at what are called intercalated discs, and that's so that they can communicate and be held together much stronger. So we can see, again, banded, but it does branch. We see all these branches going throughout. We see the nucleus here and these intercalated discs connecting each of our cells together. Okay. Lastly, we have smooth muscle. It's involuntary as well. Now, it's found in the walls of hollow organs like the stomach, uterus, and blood vessels. There are no visible striations. It's uninucleate, and it produces these spindle-shaped cells, meaning they are pointed at each end. So we see right here, uninucleate, pointed on each end. It allows them to be packed pretty close together, and they will help with being able to constrict blood flow, propel food throughout our stomach, and other involuntary processes within the body. Now we have nervous tissue. So this is composed of neurons and nerve supporting cells. We call these glial cells. Its function is to send impulses to other areas of the body, primarily through irritability and conductivity. So this stimulus response, if you recall the body temperature homeostatic mechanism that we talked about back in chapter 1, this is achieved through irritability, conductivity, with the nervous cells. So we can see right here our nervous cell right here, and then we have all these different supporting cells throughout, allowing it to communicate and support it throughout conducting that message through the body. Okay, so very quickly, I'm going to go through tissue repair. Okay, so we have regeneration and fibroses. Now, when we have regeneration, this is replacement of destroyed tissue by the same kind of cells. So this occurs when you have a basic scrape on your knee, your elbow, maybe a paper cut, something like that. Those are able to regenerate. However, sometimes we are not able to do this, and this is when a fibrosis will come into play. So this is what we commonly call scars. Now, fibroses will become common when you remove both the epidermis and the dermis. So let's say that you have to, or you get a scrape on your knuckle all the way down to the bone, or you get a deep cut from some broken glass in a plate glass in a door. I'm sure that you all know someone who, as a kid, they ran into a door with their arms out and the glass broke. This would create a fibrosis instead. Okay, so again, this deals upon the type of tissue damaged and the severity of the injury. Now, some types of tissue in the body will not regenerate at all. Nervous tissue, for example, does not regenerate very well at all. This explains why when there are spinal cord injuries, that cannot be repaired. Okay, so the events in tissue repair, we begin with our capillaries becoming very permeable. It'll introduce our clotting proteins, which will go to the injured area, try to stop the bleeding, so to say. At this point, we have the formation of granulation tissue. We will begin repairing the capillaries and rebuild the collagen fibers. And then ultimately, we will regenerate the surface epithelium, and our scab will detach. Now, depending on the severity of the injury, this will take anywhere from 10 to 14 days. So it's important that once that scab is there, that you do not remove it, because if you do, you will typically end up forming a fibrosis. Okay. So the ones that regenerate easily, epithelial tissue, fibrous connective tissue, and bone. Okay, so if you've broken a bone, you know that it is will usually heal and correct itself on its own. Ones that don't, or that regenerate poorly, skeletal muscle. So if you tear a muscle it can take a very, very long time for it to heal. And ones that are replaced primarily with scar tissue, cardiac muscle, and nervous tissue. Okay, like I was talking about a minute ago. So cardiac muscle. So if you have a myocardial infarction or a heart attack, it's very difficult for that tissue to be able to repair itself. Okay, so very quickly, I want to talk about developmental aspects of tissue. Your epithelial tissues typically will arise from all three primary germ layers. We'll talk in more detail about that actually in every chapter. The muscle and connective tissues arise from what's called the mesoderm. Again, we'll talk about that in chapters 4, 5, and 6. Nervous tissues arise from the ectoderm. We'll talk about that in chapter 7. And with old age, there's a decrease in mass and viability in most tissues. Now, this explains why as a teenager, your skin is maybe very smooth and very firm, but in old age, it begins breaking down. Now, the primary thing that breaks down is actually going to be collagen, your collagen fibers that are in those connective tissues that seem to hold everything together. Okay, so if you have any questions, make sure you post them in the comments below or put them in the Google Hangout for the class, or you can email me at mr.tucker.schs@gmail.com.